Hello, everyone. Welcome to Transform Now. I'm Brad Hairston.
And I'm Michael Marchuk.
And this is our weekly pulse check, taking a look at the news surrounding automation and AI. As always, there's a lot going on. So, Michael, let's take a look at the headlines.
Yes,
shall
dive
we?
in.
So our first article comes to us from Windows Central. Again, Michael, this is you're their number one subscriber.
Absolutely.
And it's titled Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, says AI will write 90% of code in 6 months, automating software development within a year. Is this the final nail in handwritten coding's coffin? Well, this is obviously an opinion shared by many in the tech sector, including NVIDIA's CEO, who recently posted that coding is going away and people should think about biology and education and manufacturing and even farming. Okay, that's interesting. So, Michael, is coding, much like basic accounting, likely to fade into oblivion? What did you think about this article?
I will point back at something that you and I are both familiar with, which is the mainframe. Mainframe has been dead for how many years, but it's still not dead because honestly, companies continue to use it. So they've announced the mainframe is dead. For a long time, year after year after year, it was the same type of thing. Is this the last year of the mainframe? Blah, blah, blah. And honestly, the mainframe continued to, from an architectural standpoint, continue to revive itself and find the right place in an organization. So when we start looking at hand coding versus AI coding, there's a couple things that come to mind. First is over a period of time in any organization developing code, you're going to have a whole set of libraries that do a bunch of different things that are kind of standardized. In fact, there's the .NET library, if we're talking about Windows Central here. The .NET library has a bunch of stuff where nobody's hand coding anything. They just pull in the library and do stuff with that for various functions and features. So it's not like people are hand coding a lot from that perspective. Now, from the actual logic component of it, so maybe you take apart the logic in the back end from the front end UI perspective, maybe there'd be some additional coding, but the reality is that AI will be able to do a lot of the coding, to be able to create things from a back end perspective and even from a front end perspective.
Right.
But in terms of putting together something that maybe that's where that 10% comes from. The 10% comes from the capabilities that really are the secret sauce for an organization. Most organizations don't need secret sauce applications. They just need applications that are solid and work.
Right.
So is it possible that AI could write them? I would say yes. But I also suspect that there'll be a whole lot of debugging that'll be going on because there's a meme that's been going around on LinkedIn. I've seen it a few times. This guy with his thumbs up going, "AI wrote my code in 2 minutes." And then the next slide says, "And it's been taking me the past 2 months to debug it and make it work."
Yeah.
So, there's certainly is the capability of creating code and creating interesting code. We've seen a couple times where people say, "Well, I want to make the game Pong and just have ChatGPT make it for me." And sure enough, there it does. It makes whatever game you're asking for, which is interesting in a way in terms of mimicking something that has existed in the past. But if you're creating new code and new functionality and whatnot, someone has to think through that functionality and create requirements that are very, very detailed to the point where the requirements to definitions and the actual operation of the code itself is such detailed work that the coding ends up being a very small secondary activity after that, because you've spent so much time ahead of time preparing the code. And then the implementation of the code becomes a secondary type of thing. Now, I ran an R&D department for a while for a software company, and I'm not minimizing this fact anyway, because there are a lot of things that go into developing solid code that you can use and reuse and becomes that secret sauce for your organization.
Yep.
So don't take my things out of context. but the reality is that AI will be able to write code to a certain extent, assuming that you have people who are directing it in the right way.
Right. And Michael, we continue to hear the expression "human in the loop" here in the AI age. This is another great example. In fact, Anthropic's chief product officer recently came out and said that he doesn't see software engineers totally going away. He just sees that, they'll be double checking AI generated code and performing that quality control.
Yep.
You really don't want machines checking other machines and then something goes out into production. I don't think we're ready for that yet.
Exactly.
Also, the recent World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report, they had employers rank the skills that they view as the top priority for their labor force. Programming was already way down the list. It's dropped even further. I think it dropped about 3 or 4 spots in the most recent report.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I think employers to some degree are buying into this. They understand that Gen AI has been a game changer in the coding arena, but there's still going to be a need for specialized skills. And I want to applaud you bringing up the mainframe. There are,
of course you do. You've got COBOL
programs I wrote back in 1990 that I guarantee you are still being used. And there are people in the workforce that are keeping those things alive and will need to continue to keep them alive for some time. So
agreed.
All right, well, let's move on to article number 2. This comes from ARS, and it's titled OpenAI Declares AI Race Over If Training on Copyrighted Works Isn't Fair Use. Now, we recently covered a story related to this involving Thomson Reuters, where one of the companies that used to be part of Thomson Reuters spun off, and they were building their own large language model that was using some of the IP from Thomson Reuters to train it. Thomson Reuters sued them, and in what we believe is the first time the fair use legislation has been used, the judge actually ruled in favor of Thomson Reuters, which we now know is causing a lot of people, OpenAI as an example, to be concerned, because if that's the way the law is going to be applied, then all of these big large language model providers are really at risk, because we know they're leveraging a lot of published material to train their models and to give them the most holistic kind of perspective and capability. So, Michael, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, we've had IP lawyers on our podcast, and we've had this covered a couple different ways. My personal opinion aligns somewhat with OpenAI in that I believe fair use is covered by the way that they're using these materials. So again, I'm not going to get into heavy duty copyright stuff, but they aren't literally copying stuff and reproducing it, right? They're not even producing derivations specifically of the works, although you can maybe argue that perhaps some of the image generation components might be doing something along those lines, and they've kind of shown that in the past. For example, one of the examples was if you tried to ask any of these image generation programs to show you a watch showing like 4:30 p.m. on a watch, they won't be able to. Because all of the training data was done off of these watchmakers who literally put their hands at like 2:50 in terms of the timing, because it shows the logo off really nice and spreads things out. It makes it look very nice from a advertising perspective. Right. And that's been done for years. So if you ask OpenAI to do that, to create a watch with the hands at a different position, it's very hard pressed to do that because of the training data that was used. So it's pretty obvious again where they got this data from. Now, the broader topic of what they mentioned here, that national security hinges on unfettered access to AI training data. I think that's a stretch. I don't know if our national security hinges on the fact that they have to have unfettered access to every piece of data. But they did make a good point, which is if you take other countries with perhaps more liberal or non-existent copyright usage, like China, Russia, etc., who are leveraging these same kind of training concepts, they don't necessarily concern themselves much with the fact that this is copyrighted materials, as they suck in the data.
Yeah.
So I suspect there will be some workarounds to this, if you will. Even though right now they mentioned, I think in 2025 alone, there are 823 laws, I think is what this article mentioned, that have been created this year to address this. And many of them are modeled after the European Union's law, which is very, very strict in terms of how it uses data. So unless within the United States, unless the federal government gets out in front of this and rules in a different way to perhaps clarify the use of the fair use of copyrighted materials by AI platforms for training, there's going to be an ambiguity that's going to be a state by state, and it can be very, very messy, especially considering these training models are used everywhere. And to say that, as an organization, how your model that you've chosen, I know that Meta has used whatever things and they've trained it on X. They may or may not be right. We don't know where Grok has trained their data. So there's massive exposure for all of these organizations, depending on how they interpret that law and how to interpret the various laws, I should say, across all the different states that can bring them up. So there needs to be unification associated with that, so it gives some kind of clear guidelines.
Well, all eyes are on the U.S. presidential administration, because they're due to come out with an AI action plan in July, 2025. So clearly, this is one thing that Sam Altman and others are anticipating, and they're hoping it does pave the way for them to continue to do things they're doing today. I thought this quote from Altman was interesting. He says, "Our AI model training aligns with the core objectives of copyright and the fair use doctrine, using existing works to create something wholly new and different without eroding the commercial value of those existing works." So I do think there's some room in there to maybe give them some leniency. But again, we only have one case to go on so far, and the LLM builder in that case lost out. So we'll see how it fares for
Stay tuned.
LLM providers. Yeah, stay tuned for sure. Okay, moving on to another article. This is from Forbes, and it's titled "The Future of Self-Checkout: Harnessing AI and Automation for Smarter Security." So, Michael, we don't spend a lot of time in the retail world. I can't remember the last time we covered an article on retail, but this is kind of an interesting piece talking about the self-checkout trend in grocery stores primarily. In fact, I was at a grocery store the other day, and I actually wanted a human checker because I had a big basket full of stuff. I couldn't find one. All self-checkout. That's definitely the trend. So as it's become more prevalent, it's exposing new vulnerabilities in fraud and theft, and that's what this article is about. So break it all down for us, Michael, if you would.
Sure. So the idea behind it is that retailers have gone to this self-checkout model because instead of having one person standing at each cash register ringing each individual out, they can have one person overseeing 4 to 6 of these self-checkouts as they go and helping customers if they need it. The idea behind it is that people will go in, take their things, swipe them across the barcodes, bag them themselves, and then pay with a credit card and leave. And for the most part, that's how most honest people will go through a checkout line. But then they've said there's a lot of people who are not necessarily as honest. And with those people, they will either switch barcodes from a expensive item to a lesser expensive item so that the lesser expensive item ticket is on the expensive item and pass it through the barcode. So the barcode scans, it looks like they're doing what they're doing, and they put it in there, and instead of spending 10 times as much, spend 1/10 as much for that particular item. Others are saying, well, I've also seen where you have one item that gets swiped across with another one in your hand at the same time. So only one item gets checked out instead of both of them. So there is a lot of shrinkage, as they call it in the retail industry, from the idea that people are stealing right under the nose of those checkers who are supposedly watching those self-checkouts.
Yep.
With this AI concept, the idea would be that AI cameras will be watching from multiple angles and will be able to tell, in fact, that the barcode you scanned does not necessarily align with the picture of the item that was being scanned, and therefore it can be flagged for someone to come over and look, or can see that you have multiple items within your hand as you're running them over the scanner.
Yep.
Again, allowing them to check that plus the carts and validate it against the ideas that where the items that have been scanned through. All good ideas. And the one thing that struck me as I did this was, as I evaluated this article, is I thought, okay, if you continue to have this sort of model where it's one physical person again with 4 different or 6 different even virtual checkouts, how much will it cost for the hardware and the licensing and the compute power to do the validations on each one of those customers coming through? And in that moment, would it be less expensive to put a regular person back on the checkout line again to do the work, because you're only paying $15 an hour? I'm just making a number up here to do this. And $15 an hour means that you're only spending maybe $1 per customer as they check out. That makes things pretty inexpensive. If you can say AI will be able to do that for $1 per customer checking out, maybe it can, maybe it can't. But that's where the timing, or that the cost and the expense is going to have to be evaluated. Is it really less expensive to do it with AI, when in fact, as you mentioned, maybe we bring back a little bit of humanity and and maybe some little chit chat in the lines as people walk through to be able to give that customer the right experience for your store.
Yeah, you wonder if the train's already left the station on this, though. There's a brand new grocery store in my neighborhood, and I went there the other day and I noticed that it has probably 10 to 1 checkout terminals that are self-checkout versus human centric. So
I know there's a lot of discussion too, like, well, how much loss is acceptable? Because, hey, listen, if I'm only losing a couple bucks an hour, it's still cheaper for me to let that walk out the door.
I know
that, but that's a ridiculous that we have to go to get acceptable loss as part of your thing. But that's kind of how they work.
Yeah. Well, the article does say that 50% of retailers do plan to implement some form of AI-driven loss prevention. So this is a priority for at least half of them. And 75% of those 50 think that they will have significant reduction in shrinkage. That what I thought was really interesting at the very end, it said, what's really needed is a scalable IoT platform integrating computer vision, edge AI, and real-time analytics that tracks high-value items, detects anomalies, optimizes security, blah, blah, blah. It sounds pretty sophisticated and it sounds very expensive. I wonder how many of these grocery stores are going to go that far. Certainly all those technologies used in tandem can do some amazing things.
The margins, considering the margins on a banana, I'm not sure that these grocery stores are really going to be able to make enough money to be able to pay for all that high-tech stuff. But I don't know.
Don't disagree. Okay, so let's move on to our 4th and final article. This one's from Psychology Today.
So we're moving from bananas to Psychology Today.
We are.
Excellent. All right.
Very, very quick, easy segue there.
Great segue. Exactly.
So the title is Placebo AI. Are too many of us using automation as a fast fix? So this one's written by a PhD from Wharton, who also has been involved with the United Nations for over 20 years. And she researches topics like hybrid intelligence and pro-social AI. And if you're wondering what pro-social AI is, I had to look it up. It's AI that promotes positive social outcomes, enhances human well-being, and contributes to the common good.
Okay, now wait, just by saying that, all I can think of in my mind is all of those dystopian movies where AI is in charge.
There's no pro-social in those movies. No pro-social AI. So this is outside of Terminator and all those movies.
Trust me, I'm good for you.
Yes, exactly. So her name's Dr. Walther. In this article, she asked the question, are we treating AI like a placebo, like a convenient, cost-effective fix, but something that in areas like healthcare, for example, may lower the standard of care and takes human expertise away from places where it really should be? So, Michael, what did you think?
Well, the kind of the crux behind this is we are all used to, if you've ever had to call any of your banks or whatever, we're all used to the whole, call tree type of thing where we call in, you want to talk to somebody about something very specific, but we're sent through a voice menu, and part of that could be AI, it could be a standard phone tree. But the reality is that we're all kind of used to being herded like sheep through a very strict set of stanchions to make sure that we are adhering to the way that they want to interact with us. And that lowers their costs. And eventually, if you yell operator or something enough, it will send you to a person where they can actually help you. Sometimes the call trees are good enough where they can look those things up for you. Right. But it depends on the implementation and whatnot. But beyond that, the way they're looking at this is, well, this has been used, commonly for that kind of customer care, if you will. If we apply that to the healthcare field, what kind of implications could that have if you walk in and you walk into a healthcare facility? I don't know if it's a critical care or what, but it's a healthcare facility. And when you check in, it asks you a bunch of questions and maybe helps to diagnose you, like, oh, you have a sore throat. Maybe you need antibiotics. I'll prescribe these for antibiotics for you because you're XYZ height, weight, whatever. And there you go. You don't even see a doctor because we can do that. It sounds convenient. Yeah. But it also could be an issue where people no longer actually have care as much as they do. Right. They are just graded by an algorithm for what level of service they get. Yeah. So her idea was that, this could really go down to a have and have nots kind of environment. And we actually see that here in the United States in various areas. If you go to some of the Native American reservations, there's a very low amount of health care within those environments. Or if you go to lesser affluent areas within various states, you'll see the same thing, that, hey, this entire county doesn't have a hospital. You have to go to the next county over because there's no hospital or no doctors at all within this particular county. And so these people are relegated to a standard of care that some of the folks who may be in more affluent areas are used to. Hey, I can go to whichever doctor I want to. I can select the doctor I want because I've got great health insurance and I can go to these doctors and get this personalized care that I expect. Yeah. But if you don't do that, they're saying that perhaps we get to the point where there's this, again, further bifurcation. The haves and the have-nots. The affluent people get the care that we expect to give them by a human who's experienced and understands it, and the less affluent folks would be phone treed in. Well, you sound like you're okay. We're just going to send you home with some aspirin, and it dispenses on some little container on the bottom and sends you on your way. Yeah. So this is a big issue from that perspective. I don't know if I agree completely with what she says, because I believe this is a kind of drawing it out into the what could be kind of scenario. We don't have these kind of things occurring right now. But if you say, listen, would I go for a county that has no healthcare, or at least some kind of healthcare? Some kind of healthcare might be at least the first step in this. To allow them to be able to get some kind of care at all. Yeah, that's my perspective as well. I understand her point. It's a good argument. But I wonder about those less privileged populations that aren't getting any kind of screening or any kind of, a diagnosis that can point people to them. And you think about some of these groups around the world that if they can at least leverage something AI centric to identify the people that really need to be attended to the fastest,
that could be a good thing, right? And you just
Agreed.
don't have enough
Yeah.
doctors, you don't have enough human healthcare professionals to attend to them. So there's pros and cons on both sides, but I do understand her point. I think the one major point of the article she made that I totally agree with: companies must ensure that AI complements but does not compromise their core human-centric values. I mean, that beautifully said, and I completely agree with that. So we are in alignment there. But it was, I think, a pretty fascinating piece, and I knew it was one that you would like to spend some time opining on. So
I opined.
You opined, and with that, we will wrap it up. So thanks everyone for joining us for the Pulse Check. Remember, we publish another podcast every week involving an incredible guest. So be sure and check that out. And we will see you next time on the weekly Pulse Check. Bye for now.